Welcome to the Ed Leaders Edge podcast, where we interview innovators and thought leaders in the field of education who are helping students thrive. I'm your host, Ed Madison. I'm a professor and researcher at the University of Oregon, an educational consultant, and serve as Executive Director of the Journalistic Learning Initiative, a nonprofit organization that empowers elementary, middle, and high school students to discover their voice, improve academic outcomes, and become self-directed learners through project-based storytelling. Welcome to our program. Well, welcome. Dr. Duane Davis is a literacy specialist, public education advocate, a leadership coach, and a specialist in project management, design, and evaluation. He's the president of Raising Expectations LLC and previously was executive director of K12 education initiatives at the University of Chicago, where he led a program called My Very Own Library, which increased book access for more than 50,000 families. He holds a PhD from the University of Illinois, Chicago, specializing in curriculum and instruction. Welcome, Dr. Davis.
Sir, Ed, it's great to see you.
Great to see you as well. Great to see you as well. You know, we were speaking recently about the correlation between literacy and health. Help us out with that. What do you find as it relates to those two?
Well, if you look at data and information about health literacy, it is in this country and I think internationally connected to adult literacy rates. So, which are calculated by number of adults that have gotten their GED or high school equivalency, number of adults via the census that have gotten their college degree. We don't have really good measures of that, right? So, really, for me, the connection is very pragmatic and practical. If you live in an intergenerational household and there is any human in that household that has a low literacy level and they have a health situation, and that literacy can be written, oral, speech, across that spectrum, there's going to be a challenge with them being able to get and financial literacy and technical literacy, being able to read their prescriptions, get access to healthcare, advocate for themselves. And that is a household issue. It's a children's issue. It's an adult issue. It's an elder issue. It's comprehensive. So our ability to have knowledge and information about how our health and science and environment impact us, and then what that looks like is pervasive. It's environmental. It's everywhere.
Especially when there's we're in a climate where there's so much misinformation about health related issues. I mean, I think back during COVID when there was a lot of skepticism about, vaccines and all kinds of other kind of, nefarious ideas about how to address it. So how, where are we in terms of how we combat this issue and have less disparities between certain communities and other communities?
That's an awesome question. And during the pandemic and pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, with the current pandemic times, I think there's BC and AC before COVID and after COVID. I always talked about scientific literacy, right? And I'm a former middle school English, math, science, and social studies teacher. And I talked about the scientific process, right? So there would be this information out there that said, the CDC is making new rules and they don't really know what they're doing. And I thought in my brain, I know a comprehensive public education that we've gone over the scientific process before, right? So to what extent is that connected to health literacy, and what did that mean for families and the decisions that they made, right? Or the way that they contextualize getting new information, finding out more information and evidence, and then saying, I need to make a different and new decision, and how that was polled and contextualized, and what media literacy looks like, which I know is all the great work that you do, which is how do I understand information I'm receiving? How do I understand the source of that information? And what does that look like? So during that time and post that time, I've talked about the impact on how teachers in public education writ large should really look at themselves in the mirror and say, we've been teaching these skills for a long time. How are we teaching people to use those skills in their real life? And what does that mean for how we live together, how we are together, how we build community? So what do? I think part of it is keep pushing on schools, programs like yours, the literacy work that I do and people do all over this country. How do we increase access to information? And then how do we train teachers and organizations to consider how we talk to young people and families about what are valid places to get information and what does that look like. And that's all mediated by cell phones, but also trusted resources, trusted humans, word of mouth, and community work.
Yeah. Let's talk about literacy from a broader perspective. Why can't we seem to move the needle on the so-called achievement gap between our Black and Brown students and their peers? And some people dispute that there is an achievement gap, but where do you weigh in on that?
I do not want to misquote. I believe I think it's Gloria Lasson Billings, and she was the former president of AERA. I believe that's who the scholar was. And apologies if I am misquoting Professor Lasson Billings, but she talked about the achievement debt, right? That she just reframed the gap as like disinvestment is what created the gap. So we need to talk about the debt that's owed to the communities that need to consider that and consider how they even talk about a deficit-based mindset and deficit-based thinking, and how we use data and information in order to contextualize Black and Brown students and students from rural communities and students from poor communities in that way. So that I always, as soon as I hear achievement gap, I think about the educational debt. There's also conversation about learning loss during COVID, and that we have all these students that are behind. And there's great research about what is called high dosage tutoring. There's a lot of partnerships. I just saw something. Miami-Dade County is investing in high dosage tutoring. Chicago is invested in high dosage tutoring. There's good research about, hey, tutoring can help kids gain what they might have lost in the pandemic times and pre-pandemic times as well. However, for me, I don't think it's fallacious thinking about it. I don't think I think the numbers are the numbers. But I also think we had those gaps pre-pandemic as well. And they were exacerbated by, I'm going to say comorbidities, but circumstances and situations for those communities pre that time. And I literally have just come from a community meeting about how to coordinate resources. And then was in an earlier meeting today about a national meeting about social emotional learning. And all of these kind of nonprofits and humans and adults that are really trying to address, I'm going to say how you call it, the gaps that are existing in our social safety net that are now that are made clear to some people and were made more clear to people during the pandemic to say, this is the issue. It's been an issue. How do we address this issue and what do we do about it? So I go back to that debt and say, how do we think about whole community wellness? How do we think about whole community health? How do we think about economic investment in those spaces? And those are the real leverage points in order to impact how kids show up to school, and then also how they achieve. If you don't have a good, healthy, nutritious meal in your belly, are you really ready to learn that day? What does that look like? So I try to think about it holistically and think about that terminology a little bit differently, and bring that up in meetings when people talk about data and talk about those deficits as well.
Yeah, well, we also know there are disparities in disciplinary practices, and there's lots of data on that shows that our Black and Brown students are sent to the principal more frequently, more referrals. There's a like I said, a whole body of research on that. What do you? Because I mean, as an organization called company called Raising Expectations, I think that's an apt name to talk about just looking at our kids, not from a deficit perspective, but seeing the best in them. How do you advise your clients around these areas?
Well, thank you for the shout out to the company name. And I have to give a little bit of the origin story on that, because the first principal that I ever had, first school leader, basically said, we set the tone, and that the adults in the building have a responsibility to say, we want to set, I want to say set the bar high, but definitely say, if we set the bar high, we need to help students achieve those goals. Like we're in charge of that. She really kind of talked about teacher efficacy, like our belief in the idea that we can help and impact students and what that means. And then it's also our goal to help them get to that spot, right? So if we set the bar at that level, we need to design instruction, work in the building and work in a way to get people there. And I literally go back to what I said earlier, but currently federal dollars are connected to, and there's language around what's called MTSS, which is called multi-tier systems of support. So when I work with schools, I talk about and coach them on what's called tier one. And tier one is, what does every student get when it comes to instruction and it comes to social and emotional support? Like, what does just that look like? Are we clear on what that looks like? Is everybody clear that, like, this is what good instruction looks like in our building, in our school district, in our city, and this is what good support looks like? And then there is having some kind of system to say, if students need additional help, if families need additional resources, what does that look like? And how do we get the right resources, deliver the mail to the right address? And I talk about that with nonprofit organizations too, because they're trying to work with communities and families and schools in the same way. And they need that language too. And then there's this language around data and information, which is some school districts, some communities, some cities, some states have great data systems. Some don't. And sometimes that's in a rural space. I've done some work in Clark County, Nevada, and people think of Nevada, they think of Las Vegas, but the rest of Nevada is kind of rural and it's a state-based data system. And they don't have access to kind of real-time information about school absences or what you mentioned about disciplinary procedures. They might have local information, but it feeds into this larger data system. And I came from a teacher preparation program. I've done a principal preparation program. We don't do a lot of training on like how to think about that information and how it looks in real time while we're working with students and working with families and working with communities. So there's a coordination circumstance that we need to, and a comprehensive way of looking at how we coordinate and communicate in order to do that work. So I try to help organizations do that and think about that at a very local level. And then as we kind of take the locus of control out with their community, with their neighborhood, with their city, and with their state.
Let's step away from our conversation for a moment for me to tell you about the Journalistic Learning Initiative's innovative educational tools and services. If you're looking to make the best decision for your teaching staff and students about AI adoption, improving student engagement, strengthening writing skills, promoting social media mindfulness, or enhancing college and career readiness, please take a moment to visit our website at journalisticlearning.org. Our team of University of Oregon researchers offer customized AI tools, instructional materials, professional development, and consulting. Research confirms that students with journalistic learning experience outperform their peers on numerous key indicators for college and career readiness. At the heart of our work is empowering learners to become effective communicators. If you think about it, effective communication is critical in every human interaction, whether it's writing an essay for a grade or being interviewed to secure employment. Since 2015, JLI has benefited nearly 20,000 students and served schools in 15 states and the District of Columbia. I invite you to schedule an appointment to explore how JLI can improve your students' learning outcomes. Now back to our program. Yeah. Let me ask you about artificial intelligence, because it's you can't have a discussion in education right now without bringing it up. And as you know, our organization is to some degree an innovator in terms of developing what we call ethical AI tools that promote critical thinking and not cheating. But is this, in terms of the sort of disparities between certain communities, are we once again going to be faced with an issue where there's the haves and the have-nots? I mean, certainly people have internet connection, but they may not just be predisposed to know how to even engage with AI.
Yeah, I'm glad you are on the case and you're working, pioneering that work and working with it, because I'm working with teachers and organizations kind of trying to make sense of it and trying to make sense of how they should react to it and what that means. And so I go in a couple of spaces with this. One, I'm a child of the 70s and 80s, where we use like World Book encyclopedias to get information and get knowledge. But I think about it in a similar
and the page that had the human body with the acetate or whatever.
Yeah. Listen, and we were lucky if we had a full set, but you might have 10 A's because they would give away like the A if you signed up and you were trying to find a B so you could get the B. And I'm saying the letter A and the letter B in the set of encyclopedias in your household, right? But what I remember from that time and why I bring that up is because we took what was in that book as fact, right? Like the encyclopedia is a verifiable source. We trust Britannica. We trust World Book. It was dated, right? It was old as soon as it got published. As soon as they printed it, it was dated. And the AI, I think the challenge is that it's immediate, right? And I know you know about the lawsuits the authors are having, right? Because AI is kind of using information that's out there on the internet available, right. And that's it should be copyright infringement. So I know that journalists and professional writers that are part of like class action lawsuits around AI, but we're still thinking of a resource as being verifiable, right? Like the AI is telling me the truth. And so we dealt with the same thing in the 70s and 80s until we had access to additional information and also had time and training and tools as a young student myself, as a teacher, pre-internet, even at that time. When I became a teacher in the mid 90s, it was, I've got to teach students how to use this. I've got to teach them about the immediacy of it. And I compare it to how we've dealt with social media and what that looks like. And there's a lot of information currently about the impact, the social emotional impact on young people and phones and screens. But I liken it to the same types of fears we had about the radio, the same type of fears we had about TV, and the same types of fears we had about computers. And we figured it out. We figured out a way to live together with the technology. I think AI is moving so fast that we humans are having a hard time processing and keeping up with what we should do about it and what we should do with it. So should we be skeptical? Yes. Do we need to teach a level of skepticism? Yes. Do we need more information and more tools? Definitely. But I think we're still, of course, we're in the burgeoning phases of it, but it's right here. It's always been with us, right? As soon as chatbots started, any human that's interacted with a chatbot has interacted with a level of AI, unsophisticated AI, right? And now it's getting faster, and quantum mechanics and quantum science is moving faster. So it's exciting to talk about. It's scary to think about, but I think we're still mediating the tools the same way we did in past times when innovation has happened, and we're trying to figure out how we process and what to do about it.
Yeah. You mentioned social media, and boy, I mean, I think that, certain apps in particular, these ones where you thought you could put something out there and it would disappear. I'm trying to think of the one particular one that our kids were involved with, but we also know that from a perspective of young women and body image and eating disorders and all kinds of things, and I think that the real distinction from when we were kids is that social media offers a level of sort of public shaming that is school wide. I know that one of the schools that we work with down in Southern Oregon, they talk about people taking pictures of kids while they're sleeping or in the restroom or whatever, and kids that they don't even know are shaming them publicly, school wide, and we're seeing the repercussions in terms of just the stats about mental health in teens and everything else. And I don't know if there's a turning back. I mean,
can the toothpaste go back in the tube? We can use any of those old terms to say and I know schools are dealing with that now. I've seen a lot of spaces say like, we're going to put the phones in those Faraday bags. I don't know what the Faraday bag, where it's like, we're going to zip this bag. It's like going to a comedy show or a performance where they don't want people on their phones, and we're going to lock up the phones because that's the way to do it. I think that, to me, it feels like prohibition. Like we're gonna tell people it's illegal to drink because drinking is illegal, and that's gonna keep morality, right? The morality of drinking, we're gonna control through these policies. And again, when prohibition happened, they said we had to repeal this. Like there's too many other things happening by stopping this. And what does it look like when we do that? So I think same way I talked about AI, which is how do we limit access in that way, and what's safe when we do that? What does that mean? Also, people talk about that, and bring up another kind of terrible thing in schools with school violence and school shootings that have happened, because of the gun laws in our country and how that works. Phones have saved lives in those circumstances, right? So every time we think about the way this impacts people, we also think about the way that people have access in order to call for help. We think about phones as tools in that way, and kind of how I've coached teachers around it to say, you should make your class, and this is at the university level too, make your class the charging station. Like invest in, 5 power cords, invest in a various number of chargers and cords, and say, this is a great class to charge your phones. So first 5 minutes, everybody finish whatever you need to do, send your last text, everybody charge your phone today. Make sure you walk out of here at 100%. I think the other thing is, and this is teaching teachers in schools and community organizations about apps that are useful and students can use in the classroom. We have a lot of one-to-one technology. We got a lot of laptops and we got a lot of tablets. How do we take these pieces and say, let's use this for good? And then let's figure out how we can also do both. Close the screens, turn off the screens, and write on a piece of paper, pull out a book. And I think that's a culture shift. But that has been shifting for a while. And the pandemic did exacerbate that. People ended up on their technology more. And the last thing I'll say is I hear a lot of adults talking about students getting off their phones. And then as soon as we're in that conversation, they pick up their phones too. So it's a little bit about like, do as I say, not as I do. And it's like, hey, let's practice what we preach, and let's also get off our phones as well.
Well, our organization has a series of lessons called Social Media Mindfulness, and it's designed to help students, particularly middle school and high school students, be more thoughtful about, when do I post? What do I post? Why do I post? What barriers, if any, have I set up between the way how do I allow my peers to interact or engage with me? And we're finding that these are sometimes questions that students, haven't been asked before, and then what comes to mind is an interview I heard with an anthropologist. Her name doesn't come to mind at the moment, but that she's a college professor who had a wicker basket. And when the students would enter the room, they agreed to deposit their phones in the wicker basket. And at first, there was obviously a little resistance to that because there just wasn't a norm that was practiced in other classes. But boy, did they thank her, at the end of the semester for having just a distraction-free experience of learning that wasn't interrupted by, shopping on Amazon or whatever they might be doing otherwise.
Ordering food on Uber Eats if they live in a space where they can get food delivered. Like it's just we don't create like a T-chart to say pros and cons and then talk about like, okay, well, let's really address what this looks like. And some of that is like your real human to human action with that anecdote you just told with a human that I trust wants me to put this up so I can interact with them. It better be good, right? So now it's like, as the educator, as the school, like what value are you providing so I'm not distracted? Like what's happening? There's this assumption that it's like eating your vegetables or going to the doctor, right? Like there's a set of humans that say, I should eat some vegetables. I should eat these amount of vegetables every day. There's a set of humans that say, I have insurance. Hopefully I'm able to get health care and I should go to the doctor even when I'm not sick in order to check in on myself. I think how we think about the tool and how we think about our interaction with what's positive about it will also kind of help us and help how we think about how we interact as humans and how we think about the good things that are provided through this access and leverage that to have these conversations that you're having about mindfulness around it, right? Like there's a time for this. And in this time, I want to present something to you that's really interesting, that's applicable to your life, that's going to help you out in the world that you're going to be a part of as a young person, as a college student, as an adult educator, somebody that's out in the world.
Dr. Duane Davis, where do people find you and learn more about your work on the internet?
Okay, on the internet, you can, at this moment in time, as we are recording this, you can find me on LinkedIn at Duane Davis, and I have a link tree, same thing, Duane Davis, website and other tools coming soon. But I'm so happy to be here with you today and talk about your work, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Take care.
You do the same.
The Ed Leader's Edge podcast is produced by the Journalistic Learning Initiative. Please check out our latest books, Language Arts in Action from W.W. Norton Publishing, and Raising Empowered Learners from Rauman and Littlefield. For more information about our work, please visit journalisticlearning.org or edleaderedge.org. Thanks for listening.